We are live.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our joint budget and taxation and appropriations subcommittee budget process. We have a fairly ambitious group of budget analyses to get through today, and the House is back on the floor at 2 o'clock. So we're gonna have to move relatively quickly and follow up on things we need to follow up on. I do wanna say up front that Secretary Slater reached out to Senator McCray and I a few days ago when he realized he had a schedule conflict. He was willing to cancel his other obligation to be here, but Chair McCray and I felt that he's before us so often on so many different budgets that was not necessary. And obviously he's very accessible to us. So we told him we didn't think it was necessary that he cancel his other obligation to be here. So I don't want anyone to think that he was treating this with a cavalier nature. He was very careful and checking with us to make sure that we didn't have any objection, and obviously, as I said, he's very accessible to us. So with that, why don't we get to the analysis? I believe first up will be the Maryland Energy Administration and our analyst, Tanya, unless Chair McCray has anything to add at the top here. All right, well, thank you, Chair McCray. Tanya, the floor is yours.
Yes, so today I am presenting the Maryland Energy Administration analysis. As you can see in this opening page, the budget increases by 15.5 million, or about 30%. The increase is exclusively in their special fund sources. There's a brief discussion of the agency's performance, primarily related to the Janie Lawton Conservation Loan Program. Prior to fiscal 2020, MEA operated 2 revolving loan fund programs for energy efficiency, one for state agencies and one for nonprofits, businesses, and local governments. Legislation in 2019 combined the programs effectively, which began in fiscal 2020. In fiscal 2020 and 2021, MEAs reserved a portion of the funding for the nonprofits for a certain period of time, and then the nonprofits, local governments, and businesses for about 6 months to give them access to them at the same level they would have had when the programs were separated. MEA did make some changes to the program as a result of COVID. They decreased the interest rates, allowed loan payments to be deferred, and offered some other changes to the program. Exhibit 1 presents information on the agency encumbrances, which is the loan activity versus the spending. One of the primary things to note here is that the spending increased about 27% in fiscal 2020. This change was in the non-state agency portion of the program. In fiscal 2019, these entities there were 0 loans provided to these entities. In fiscal 2020, there were 4 loans of about $328,000 provided to the entities, which is just under 40% of the funding that was kind of initially reserved for them. In fiscal 2021, they have committed $200,000 and have an application on hand for another loan to these kind of non-state entities, but that would still only be about half of the funding that's kind of initially dedicated to them. And they anticipate state agencies to take up the rest. Despite the low use of the fund by the non-state entities, the fiscal 2022 allowance increases funding intended for those entities by $150,000. And we've asked the agency to comment on why that increase has occurred despite the low use of the program by the entities, and also the impact of COVID on the interest in the program and loan repayments. If we move ahead to kind of the overview of the agency's spending, this is the agency's spending by source. Although the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative auctions are the primary ongoing source of revenue for the agency, it's not always the largest source in any one year. In fiscal 2022, Public Service Commission order sourced funds, which are generally placed into the Strategic Energy Investment Fund, but have kind of dedicated uses, comprise the majority of the funds at 58%. That's up from 35% in fiscal 2021. That increase is driven in part by a lower amount of Reggie related funds in MEA's budget, but also two kind of primary drivers of increases, which is $3 million that is available from the Exelon and Pepco merger several years back. Those funds were expected to be fully utilized in fiscal 2020, but due to some delays in project development related to COVID and kind of the location of the projects, those funds are available in fiscal 2022. The other primary driver is the Maryland Gas Expansion Fund, and I will discuss that in more detail in a moment. So as you can see in fiscal 2022, this was a significant, these kind of non-Reggie sources were a significant amount of the funding in their budget. However, going forward, they will have to comprise a significantly less amount of their budget because most of the balances from these sources are largely depleted after fiscal 2022 based on the current spending plans. Only about 3.4 million would be available. The Maryland Offshore Wind Business Development is really the only fund source that has any kind of significant amount left, although the balance of that is also declining. However, the Public Service Commission recently opened an application period for offshore wind RECs, and as a result, if applications are approved, additional funding would come into the fund.
Thank you.
Exhibit 5, which continues onto a couple pages, shows information about the budget change. The budget changes are largely driven by the availability of various funding, particularly the Reggie funding. There's one, the largest decrease is in the State Fleet Electric Vehicle Program. It's a decrease of about 2.3 million, but the program is actually just being transferred to being budgeted in the Department of Budget and Management, where it was budgeted in fiscal 2020. So it's not actually a change to the program except for where it's budgeted. Again, the largest increase is in the Gas Expansion Fund. So the Gas Expansion Fund was available for the first time in fiscal 2020, and it was intended to promote natural gas expansion by making it available to new customers in areas of the state and reconnecting customers. This fund is the result of a merger between Alta Gas and Washington Gas. It was a total of $30.3 million that were available for this purpose. The funding was used in fiscal 2020, about 4 million. And then in fiscal 2021, there was $6.5 million budgeted from the fund. And it was for similar programs as operated in fiscal 2020. However, the General Assembly restricted those funds to be used for low-income weatherization. However, the fiscal 2022 allowance assumes the use of the entire fund balance that wasn't spent in fiscal 2020. So all 26 million that is left. As a result, it assumes these funds will be canceled. And we asked the agency to comment on why they did not use the funds for which they were restricted. MEA indicates that the decision to put the entire funding in the allowance was to support kind of multi-year activities for opportunities for displaced workers. DLS had recommended a narrative requesting a report on the applications and the awards because this is a significant, would be a significant ramp up of the program. I would note that committee amendments adopted by the House Ways and Means Committee and Economic Matters Committee on the Relief Act would repurpose these funds. This is the personnel data. The only notable change there is that they've eliminated 2 contractual FTEs as a budget saving measure. The first issue is related to the Strategic Energy Investment Fund revenue and expenditures. The revenues increased after some program changes were announced in August of 2017, kind of stabilizing around kind of $5 an allowance. The primary program change goes into effect in calendar 2021, and will go into effect in the first auction in March. That change creates an emissions containment reserve under which a certain number of allowances will be reduced if prices fall below a certain level, which is $6 in calendar 2021. As you can see in the last couple auctions, the prices have risen and are above that floor price. Despite that, the revenue continues to be forecast in the budget at the minimum clearing price, which is much lower than what we've seen in recent years. That's to ensure that they don't have to make a kind of mid-year program reductions if revenue falls short. And then they use that extra money in future years. And that results in a substantial fund balance, most of which is intended to be used in a future year. This Exhibit 7 provides information on the estimated closing balance from the Reggie source kind of accounts within CEF based on the current spending plan. As you can see, in fiscal 2020, they had a balance of $76 million. These balance estimates are again based on that lower revenue forecast. So fiscal 2021's fund balance will actually very likely exceed the 2020 level. There is one change that the administration has proposed in legislation, which would transfer $4 million of revenue to the Transportation Trust Fund in fiscal 2022. And you can see the impact of that on the fund balance. Again, I would note that the committee amendments to the Relief Act would use a portion of the balance. Exhibit 8 compares the use of the spending of the funding from CEF to the statutory allocation based on the revenue. As you can see, the funding is mostly supported by fund balance, which would not be unexpected given the way they forecast revenue. And this exhibit here just highlights some of the changes in the areas of spending. So overall spending from CEF, from Reggie source CEF increases by about $10.7 million. Most of that in energy assistance due to available fund balance and increased need given the pandemic. MEA related Reggie decreases by about 4.1 million, but again, 2.3 million of that is just shifting the administration of the state electric fleet vehicle program. The second issue is related to the electric vehicle tax credits. As you can see in Exhibit 10, the number of electric vehicles registered continue to grow, although the rate of growth slowed in fiscal 2020. Maryland has a goal of about 60,000 electric vehicles in 2020. This is about 43% of the goal. The state supported electric vehicle purchases through a tax credit since fiscal 2011. The program was extended and altered and expanded several times since then, but the most recent extension required cars to be purchased entitled by July 1, 2020, and no legislation was passed to extend that date. CEF transfers have assisted the TTF in reducing the impact of the tax credit on their revenues since its creation. Exhibit 11 highlights the utilization of the program. Maximum credits were allowed per year were introduced in the program beginning in fiscal 2015. At that point, they kind of reached the maximum credits allowed each year. In 2019, they actually reached that level in February. And then in 2020, they reached that level in September. And at that point, the program is functionally expired because the cars had to be purchased before July 1. And there was still a backlog of applications were eligible purchases that had not been made. So SB 152, which is a departmental bill, would authorize payment of credits for eligible applications submitted before January 1st, 2021 from the TTF, and then would authorize transfers of $4 million in each fiscal 2022 and 2023 from the CEF to the TTF to offset a portion of the impact of that. There's about 3,900, just under that, applications, according to MEA, that are would be eligible for this. At the average credit, that would be about $9.7 million in funding. There's two recommendations, the first of which is annual narrative related to the CEF revenue and spending, and the second is related to the Maryland Gas Expansion Fund. And with that, I'll conclude my presentation.
Thank you, Tanya. As always, are there any questions for the analyst? Vice Chair Krim.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to confine this to one question, hopefully. So when the Public Service Commission was audited this year, the auditors determined that they were not keeping track of the conditions related to mergers. You know what I'm talking about, things that they have to pay, et cetera. Yep. But since then, we've sort of worked that out with the commission and the auditors. But my question to you is, are you keeping track of that, or is MEA keeping track of that? Do you know?
The conditions broadly, or the conditions provided? Yeah,
the condition, like you mentioned, the Exelon condition in this report, in this analysis. So is MEA keeping track of that? That's what I want to know. Like, okay, so we have another one here, the Alta Gas and the Washington Gas. Is somebody keeping track of that to make sure those terms are met?
So to the extent that the funds flow through the state budget, particularly now MEA's budget, we examine the uses of the funds as we would with other areas of the state budget. Generally, the budgetary purposes for which they're provided, MEA has followed. So to that extent, we track them. I don't necessarily track every condition, but to the extent that the funds flow through the budget.
Okay, I can call you about that, Tanya. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Delegate Beitzel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had a question, Tanya. On those electric vehicle credits, are those direct payments to a purchaser of electric vehicle, or are they something that they need to take on their income as a credit on their income tax returns?
I believe it's a excise tax credit, so the sales.
So it's a direct payment to them if they buy the car?
I believe that would be, you have to apply to get tax credit.
Okay, so it's separate from the income tax. They would
Yes.
apply. And that, how much, say on average, are those payments to people to buy electric vehicles?
The average credit value in the most recent data I had was about $2,500. The maximum credit was $3,000.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any further questions for Tanya? Okay, I don't see any on your side either, Chair McCray. Tanya, thank you again. We'll now turn to the agency. Mary Beth Tung, the director of MEA, and her team. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Chair McCray and Chair Corman and other members of the committee. Good afternoon. I'm Mary Beth Tung. I'm the director of the Maryland Energy Administration, and I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to you folks about the agency's budget for fiscal year 22. Joining me today is our Chief of Staff, Chris Rice, Assistant Director of Energy Policy and Legislative Liaison, Landon Farrig, the Director of Programs, Eric Kaufman, our Director of Finance and Administration, Wyatt Shifless. This is his first year before this committee, so hopefully he will survive it. I'm sure he will. Also with us are other members of our staff prepared to provide whatever detailed responses may be necessary during our hearing, so they're there as backup. So I wish to extend my gratitude, as I do every year, to the DLS analyst, Tanya Zimmerman, and since I have both committees together, you'll hear it at the same time. As you hear, she's very comprehensive. She gives a good review. She probably understands our budget as well as we do, or if not better. She does a really good job, and I said it before and I say it again, I think she's a real rock star. So thank you, Tanya, for all your efforts. MEA also concurs with both her recommendations. I don't want to go through in detail what you already have in front of you in our testimony. My remarks will focus on the DLS recommendations, including discussions about the CEF revenue and rent, funding and the gas expansion fund activities. But primarily, we want to talk about our responses to COVID and MEA's recent achievements. As I said before, we'd like to accept the DLS recommendations. Just wanted a few notes on the Strategic Energy Investment Fund revenue. We will provide the additional information, but I just want to alert you to the CEF report that we send out every year. And if you'd like a copy, we can make sure that anyone who wants that, please let us know and we'll provide that for you. And secondly, we will adopt a committee narrative requesting information on status and Maryland Gas Expansion Fund programs. Just want to note that we, and this fits into what Delegate Krim was asking, we do provide reports to the PSC on all our funding that they order us to take care of, and we provide that to them every year. And the Maryland Gas Expansion Fund is the same. We also provide them yearly reports on the funding. So that is, we do track that. We track that very closely. We do provide reports to the PSC on all the funding revenues. So just wanted to answer that question. And while I'm answering questions of Delegate Beitzel, that is an excise tax payment that's made, and they do have to apply for it. Our partners at MDOT handle a lot of that, and then they let us know, and we replenish their funds. So that's how that works. First, I'd like to talk a little bit about MEA responsiveness during COVID. We've done a lot of things to try to help. We're not on the front lines of COVID per se. A lot of other agencies have a lot more to do, but of course we all are on the front line in some respect. So the Lawton loan repayment schedule was mentioned by Tanya. We have allowed payment schedules to be reworked in light of some of the slower payments that are coming into the Lawton loan folks. We also have gone 100% teleworking. We've gone to complete electronic filing and electronic routing for signatures. These are projects we wanted to do before, but we got a little help during COVID because it had to be done. So these are changes that will be in place going forward, even after COVID. We've made amendment to grant contracts to reset completion dates due to slowdowns in local permitting, office closures, supply chain interruptions, and so forth. And we've done a clean energy workforce analysis in partnership with NASEA, the National Association of State Energy Officers. That's to help programs target recovery options, and that should be completed in a couple weeks. Recent achievements, we'd like to highlight some of our successes just so that all of you are aware of what we've been doing in the last year. Residential in the past year, in fiscal year 20, we've incentivized 21,000 kilowatts of residential solar, 935 EV chargers. And we've also provided $5.7 million to nonprofits and local governments to enable these organizations to implement low to moderate income energy efficiency projects in the communities that they serve. The state of Maryland has been also recognized nationally. We've been rated 6th in the American Council for Energy Efficient Economy, the state scorecard. That's the highest to date. we lovingly call the organization ACEEE. ACEEE just recently, within the last week, ranked us 4th. This is a new category for transportation electrification, so that's 4th in the nation. We were ranked number 1. This is something that we were very proud of. The World Resources Institute ranked Maryland number 1 among states in reduced greenhouse gas emissions. We've reduced it 38%, commensurate with the strong economic growth of 17% GDP from 2005 to 2017. So this was pre-COVID, but it just showed that greenhouse gas reductions does not have to make a hit on our economy, that we were able to grow our economy while reducing greenhouse gas emissions. It's not a zero-sum game as some folks would like it to be, or think it is. In fiscal year 20, we helped install 25 megawatts of anticipated solar capacity, 28 awards to communities and community-based organizations to support projects that benefit low and moderate income Marylanders, and nearly 1,000 new EV chargers. The source of program continuity achievements from fiscal year 17 to current, nearly 78 communities partner with MEA under the Maryland Smart Energy Communities Program. A lot of this does go to LMI communities, low and moderate income communities. 8,300 solar PV households, 950 new geothermal installations. When I first got to the agency, we weren't getting many geothermal applications. Those are increasing a lot. 1,800 clean burning wood stoves, 2,700 EV charging stations, and nearly $25 million to LMI communities for energy efficiency. In addition, we have 13 resiliency planning efforts going on right now. And I believe we just had one apply to actually do the work. So that was really cool. And resiliency is to be able to continue operating even when the grid is down. In order to continue these successes, it's critical to maintain a sustainable financial resource to encourage ongoing investment in the clean energy sector. As of today, Reggie-derived CEF is projected to be the primary source of new income into the CEF moving forward, and Tanya went through in vivid detail on that. Non-Reggie C funds have been supplementing MEA's budget to date, and as she mentioned, that's going to be largely gone. In parallel, various pieces of legislation, as she mentioned, are being put forward that will add new and expanded uses of Reggie and Reggie-derived CEF, and that would take away from our programs. Based on recent historical Reggie proceeds, future Reggie auctions alone will not be able to support the existing programmatic activity funded by the CEF and the proposed funding demands by new CEF-funded legislative initiatives. So in that case, hard choices will have to be made. Existing CEF programs, which obviously are really having an impact, could be reduced or eliminated. And I just want to make a point that Tanya also made is Reggie auctions, it's an auction, it's a market. It's unpredictable. When I first came to the agency, it was at one of its lowest or highest points. It dipped to its lowest within 2 months. So that's why we budget at the floor, as Tanya said. So it's really important to protect these funding sources for us to continue our program. So thank you again for the opportunity to address the subcommittees. We're available to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Director Tung. I might have missed it. On page 12 of the analyst report, it asks you to comment on why these funds, for everyone else's benefit, the natural gas expansion funds, were not used for the purpose which the General Assembly restricted them. I think you might have missed that in your.
I did not mention it. We did briefly on a written testimony mention it. Let me find it in the written. We tried not to copy what was in the written testimony.
Appreciate you not reading it out loud, but if you just want to briefly comment since it's in the analyst's report.
Yeah, this is an order. The funds that were provided for the gas expansion fund was a PSC order 88631 in case number 9449. The reason, and that is in the, you don't have to write that down. It's in the testimony. The reason for that is that's how you would find the case, the case file at the PSC site. We were directed to spend these funds to support the expansion of natural gas infrastructure. and this was due to a settlement between many parties. Luna was one of the parties, Prince George's County, Montgomery County, and I can't remember. I think there was a third one in there. So this was a settlement, which is a contract and agreement between various parties, and the diversion of these funds would hinder MEA's ability to fulfill the requirements of the order, which we're required to do, and also this sets, we think, kind of bad precedents for agreements that the state has made and then not able to fulfill because the funds were rediverted. So I believe that there were some testimonies sent in from the PSC both last year and this year on this very issue, because that kind of impacts their ability to make sure the funding that they have ordered the state agencies to handle is handled the way the order says. So that's the best answer I can give on that as to why this.
I would refer you to, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I would just make sure you take a look at the Relief Act amendments that Tanya mentioned out loud in her briefing, because that also will alter the use of these funds. My understanding is that's something that is supported by two branches of government from both parties. So I'll just ask you to take a look at that. In terms of non-Reggie sources for the CEF, are you seeing anything on ACPs coming down the pike that may help a little bit, or has that not been looked at? Or
we've been watching it. We've gotten literally 5-digit numbers out of that. Right now, we haven't really seen an uptick. We think last year a lot of the increase was taken up by excess credits that were already on the market. So we don't know if we're going to see an uptick. We haven't seen it yet, but if there's going to be an uptick in ACP or not. We haven't seen it, so obviously it's not something that we can budget or count on.
Thank you. Other questions for the agency? Delegate Beitzel.
Thank you, Chairman. I have a question on, you mentioned you have a 38% 38% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. Out of that reduction, do you have a breakdown as to how much of that is like converting solid carbon-based fuels to natural gas, and how much is new solar or wind coming online or biomass? Do you have any breakdown of that?
I do. I don't have it at my fingertips right now. I know the Greenhouse Gas Commission has covered that in a lot of their reports. And we do keep track in our CEF report. We also go through how much is due to each of our programs, so we can get that information to you.
All right, thank you. And then another question on that Eastern Shore gas line expansion. What's the status of that?
I'm sorry, you broke up. I couldn't hear you.
The Eastern Shore, there's a gas line extension project to go to the correctional facility down there to expand natural gas. How's that proceeding, or is it?
It is proceeding, and it also goes to the University of Maryland Eastern Shore. Right. So, and to residents and businesses in the area. It is currently under construction. As far as that's all I know, because it's in the hands of Chesapeake Utilities right now. But it is they are currently constructing the pipeline at this point.
And Mr. Chairman, if I may just, and in cheek, the natural gas that'll be provided there, would you say that natural gas is going to be fracked natural gas?
We don't know. It's natural gas goes to a depot and it's mixed, so it's really hard to know how much is fracked and how much is not fracked. Methane is methane from wherever it comes from. We do have a major pipeline that comes into Maryland from the Gulf Coast, so that is obviously not fracked. It's offshore, but because of the and I've tried to get a handle on this. And when I ask different people, they all give me different answers, and the reason is it depends on how much is flowing in at any given time as to how much. I've heard as low as 2% up to 10%, and it depends on who's getting their source from where. So I know that term has been used a lot. This is fracked gas. It's not. The majority is not fracked gas, but I don't have any percentages. Right, and nobody in the industry is able to provide that because of the changing nature of it.
All right, I understand. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Delegate Beitzel. Any other questions for the agency? Chair McCray, you good? Okay, well, thank you, Director Tung, and thank you, Tanya, for the analysis. I should note we're joined by the full committee appropriations vice chair. Not sure what Chair McCray did to make him have to come watch us, but welcome, Vice Chair Chang. We will now move on to the Maryland Automobile Insurance Fund. Caleb Weiss is our analyst. The floor is yours.
Can everyone see the analysis? Thank you, Mr. Chair. So for the Maryland Automobile Insurance Fund, as you can see here, they run on a calendar year basis, and in calendar year 2021, the budget decreases by 0.09 million or 0.3%. Moving on to the where it goes chart, I'd like to highlight a few changes. You can see here the constituent changes between the insured division and uninsured division. And then just a few changes that I'll highlight. You can see here in the insured division, a decrease in personnel expenses, and the uninsured division increase. Also notable is the increase in purchases of computer equipment in the insured division. And finally, the technical support decrease down here in the uninsured division for the total budget change. Moving on, I know last year we talked a little bit about the ratio of surplus to assessment threshold, and I just wanted to highlight that this year. It appears to have somewhat stabilized, so we're now at 2.34%, so it doesn't look like an assessment it is imminently going to be triggered at this point. However, there still is a net loss projected in fiscal 2021, and you can see here the beginning surplus as well. Moving on to the active vehicle analysis. This remains fairly unchanged since last year. You can see Prince George's County is the largest, followed by Montgomery and Howard grouped together, and then the Baltimore metropolitan area. Here we have the uninsured division's financial statement, and there's nothing much that I wanted to highlight there. However, we talked about the insured division's policy issued, and this is the #1 issue we want to talk about. The PFC financed policies continue to be the overwhelming majority. You can see here that 2.3% of people paid in full, and then the Maryland Auto Installment Plan continues to be just 2% of policyholders. This is important is because the PFC financed ones lead to a greater cost to consumers due to the interest payments rather than using the installment plan. However, the installments plans large down payments, DLS believes, and Maryland Auto believes contribute to the low utilization. So we have here that DLS recommends the General Assembly can consider amending statute to allow for lower down payment plans from 25% to 20%, and then respectively down to 12.5 to 10% for those two amounts. And we believe that this would increase utilization of the installment payment plan and save Maryland drivers money. I would highlight that Maryland Auto believes that the additional amount that drivers use from financing using a PFC is around 250 per insurance policy. Moving on, in terms of recommendations, we just have this one, and then for actions, it's non-budgeted, so there are none. And then I'll just note that there is the JCR response in the appendix from last year on the assessment threshold, if you care to look more about that. So that is all. Thank you.
Thank you, Caleb. Any questions for the analyst? Questions for the analyst? Okay, then we will turn to the agency. We are joined by the relatively new executive director, but no stranger to this set of subcommittees, Mr. Redmer. Mr. Redmer, all yours. You're on mute.
Sorry about that, Mr. Chairman. Thank you and good afternoon to you and the members of the different committees. My name is Al Redmer, Executive Director of the Maryland Automobile Insurance Fund. Also available for questions in addition to myself would be Paul Dieter, our Fiscal Director, and Sandy Dodson, Manager of Government Relations. And I would like to thank our DLS analyst, Caleb Weiss, for his hard work on this, as well as Jennifer Spangler, our analyst from DBM. And I'm naturally not going to read you our response that has been forwarded to the committee, but I can assure you that the entire team at Maryland Auto continues to be proactive in managing our expenses. You'll see a reasonable loss ratio for 2020. We increased our surplus, and while there certainly are challenges that we face in 2021, we have a talented team that is ready to meet them, and am comfortable saying that we do not have an assessment projected at least through 2023. So our report is, our response is in front of you. And again, no anticipated assessment before 2023. We were also asked to respond to DLS recommendation that the General Assembly consider amending our statute to lower the down payment on plans policies that we sell, and we thoroughly endorse that recommendation. The current installment plan is the result of legislation that passed in 2023, and we believe that the combination of a high down payment and a limited number of installment options have resulted in only 2% of our policyholders utilizing that installment plan. So we would support three solutions: a signed disclosure requirement that the policyholders have actually seen the options that are available, combined with a lower down payment percentage and an increase in the number of allowable payments. And when you think about it, Mr. Chairman, as you know, folks come to us when they have been canceled by another company or turned down from two policies. And surprisingly, more than 50% of our policyholders are with us not because of a bad driving record, but because of financial challenges. And when you think about it, we have folks that have financial challenges. They come to Maryland Auto, which is not cheap to begin with, and then they're forced to have a large down payment, or they go to the premium finance company and they have to pay high interest rates just for the benefit of driving. And it's no wonder that we've seen a significant increase in the number of uninsured motorists driving on our roads. We had over 22,000 just in January that, as notified by the Motor Vehicle Administration. So this is a significant challenge for policyholders around the state, especially those with financial challenges. So we would embrace the department's recommendation to modify and improve the criteria for our installment plan. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to pause and answer any questions.
Very much, Chair McCray.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Director Redmer, our new Director Redmer, and your team. First, I know that you are a new director, so what I'm saying, just please keep in mind that this issue was also brought up in previous reports. So when I looked at Senate Bill 149 and House Bill 457, which is already passed out of my respective committee, I know that this was something that was sought after from a MAIF to make sure that you all's organizations was viable. But this, the one in reference to these payment plans, and I won't dig into it because you dug into it a great bit and you understand the population that this is going to be able to benefit very much so, but I didn't see a bill this year in reference to the respective issue. And as I stated, I know that you are new director, but I at least would like to at least hear a commitment. I know that you endorse it. I know that you embrace it. I know that you are encouraged by it, but I would at least like to get a confirmation that we're going to seek out and address this issue next year. And I also, if necessary, if there isn't a respective sponsor in the Senate, I would like to offer up that I would like to be a partner in reference to addressing this issue. Just as you stated, the people that are affected by this payment plan issue and us not addressing it is very, very complex.
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate that. And, you know, as a result of my newness, I can tell you that I have been told that the current installment plan that we have was a political drama that occurred in Annapolis. It was very contentious with opposition from the premium finance companies, and the decision was made, rightly or wrongly, that with the challenges that the General Assembly had in 2021 in working through the issues with COVID, that this probably was not the time to have a protracted battle in Annapolis. So that's why we deferred. So I apologize for that. I can tell you, though, that dealing with our policyholders that have the financial challenges that we discussed is a top priority for us, as evidenced by, and I know that you know this, but we've created a specific outreach, a financial education initiative for our policyholders and the general public in an effort to provide them the tools, the information, and the education they need to make better financial decisions in an effort to, number one, improve their lives overall generally, but specifically to accelerate the process that they can utilize so that they can transition to the standard insurance market, which is what our objective always is.
Thank you, Mr. Redmer. Thank you, Director Redmer. Let me be clear. And I think that you and I both know, and you've stated it several times, that down payment is just out of reach for so many people.
It is.
We have to do something about it. So I look forward to working with you in the next session, whether it's contentious or not. I think it's a worthy issue for.
We appreciate your leadership on this. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Chair McCray. Any other questions for the agency? Okay, seeing none, thank you, Director Redmer, for being here.
Thank you, folks. Appreciate it. Good seeing you.
Colleagues, we will now turn to the Transportation Secretary's office and the analysis by Steve McCulloch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Steve McCulloch here to present the Secretary's office. The fiscal 22 budget for the Secretary's office at MDOT decreases by $1.4 million. Excuse me for a second here. The PAYGO budget for the Secretary's office decreases by 10.7, and you'll see this is a continuing trend throughout the department's units due to the reduction in revenues. We'll note, looking at 2021 deficiency appropriations, MDOT did not get reductions at the Board of Public Works other than the statewide reduction for unemployment insurance, but there are deficiencies that are implementing 2021 basically cost containments, and the Secretary's office decreases by $4.2 million due to that, which means that, you know, when you look at the 1.4 decrease in 2022, that's on top of this reduction to the base budget as well. The Secretary's office, this shows the spending, and you can see that almost half of the spending for the Secretary's office goes to support the technology services, the IT systems for the department. Another 20% is given away as operating grants and aid, and then the remaining 34% goes towards administration for the department. As I indicated, the budget in 22 decreases by $1.4 million. Personnel expenses are up basically due to decreased turnover and the annualization of the salary increase. So personnel increases by $613,000, and the rest of the budget basically decreases by $2 million. 1.7 million of that is a reduction to grants to the metropolitan planning organizations. Most of that reduction is a reduction in federal funds with a little bit of matching special funds. So that's why that is decreasing. In personnel, there are no operating changes in the operating personnel complement. In the capital, there is an internal transfer in from another unit. Turning now to the capital budget, here is the 6-year planned funding for the Secretary's capital budget. The Secretary's office capital generally supports the department's headquarters and its systems, plus air quality initiatives in the Baltimore, Washington regions, as well as giving out grants to nonprofits and other government agencies for transportation related items. We'll skip over. These just show again the cash flows in the capital budget. And really, the only thing left to talk about is the recommended actions. First recommended action is annual language capping the grants and aid funding to that purpose. And on the PAYGO side, this is annual language requiring notification for any change in the capital budget that exceeds 500,000. And that concludes my presentation, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Are there questions for the analyst? Okay, I'm going to turn it over to the agency. Just a reminder, Secretary. Oh, I'm sorry, Delegate Krem. Madam Vice Chair.
It took me a minute to get to my raised hand. So I want to talk about the system preservation money a little bit. So you said the goal every year, or it was the analysis, is 850 million. And now I think you said it's down to 700, I'm not sure, 715 million is where it is now. So how do they determine what projects will not get funded, or is that an agency question?
That would be an agency question. I will note that due to the revenue decreases with COVID, one of the problems any agency has, and MDOT being such a large capital program, obviously one of the concerns is to keep any projects that are currently under contract going. And so in the short term, it's hard to really change the funding for some of those big projects because you're in mid-project, you don't want to shut down a site and send people home. Therefore, in the kind of the short term, system preservation, which is made up of a lot of smaller projects, is where there is some ability to manage. And you can see it as from this graph that that is missing the goal this year. They have missed it in the past. Back in 2013, just before the revenue increase, they were not hitting that mark either. But in terms of specifically which projects, that is an agency response.
So we know that money from the federal government, relief money, is not in the governor's budget. Do you know of any money directly associated with transportation that would be coming?
Yes.
To the state? Yes.
Yes, from the December stimulus, there is $100 million in total funding that is expected to come to various aspects for MDOT, including SHA and MTA, the airport as well. So there are funds that will be added, and that's certainly a discussion you can have with the agency as to where they plan to put that.
Okay, and that is not, that's money that's already been approved. That's not any new money that may come, right?
That would be from the, correct, that's from the December,
Yes.
December bill by Congress. The timing on that is up to the the various federal agencies. They've got to go through their process to get everything allocated. That just was not done in time for those funds to be reflected in the budget.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair Krim. Any other questions for the analyst? Great, we will turn to Deputy Secretary Powell from MDOT.
Great, thank you. And Chairman Corman, thank you for the explanation of the Secretary's absence. We do appreciate that. So you acknowledging that he is very accessible. So good afternoon, Chairman McCray and Chairman Corman and members of the subcommittees. For the record, I'm Sean Powell, Deputy Secretary of the Maryland Department of Transportation. The Secretary would like to have been here today, but is performing one of his other duties as a WMATA board member. It is a pleasure to be here to discuss the Secretary's office budget as well as the program, as well as the debt program following this presentation. Today I have with me Heather Murphy, the Director of Planning and Capital Programming, and Jacqueline Hartman, our Chief Financial Officer, to help her answer any questions. The department will be before you 10 times this session with the various budgets of MDOT, so we'll try to take this opportunity to keep this one as brief as possible. We were not asked to comment on anything in the analysis, and we take no issues with anything included in the analysis. We would like to thank Mr. McCullough for his continued great work on our budget. He has a very good understanding of the department and presented a very fair analysis. The analysis does include 2 recommended actions. Both are annual pieces of budget bill language that we concur with both. With that, we are now, I'll turn it back over to you, Mr. Chair. We're available for any questions.
Thank you. Any questions for the department? Okay. Deputy Secretary Powell, thank you very much. Obviously, we'll hear from you in a couple more minutes. Just a reminder to my House colleagues, we have about 20 minutes to get through everything we have left, unfortunately, which is suboptimal for all of us. We'll turn it back to Mr. McCullough for the debt service analysis.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, MDOT debt service, the budget fiscal 22 allowance is up $35.4 million over the current year. Debt service is, as you know, basically driven by the amount of debt that's been issued and the the timing. Exhibit 1 shows the history from 2012 through 2020 and then the projection through 2026. The green bars are the bond issuances, and as you can see in 2022, after a lot of increasing bond sales since the gas tax increase in 2013, the reduction in revenues due to COVID, and the fact that MDOT was already approaching its minimum debt service coverage ratios means that in 2022, there's only $100 million in debt planned issuances. And you can see it ramps up a little bit. Debt service is the blue bars and the debt outstanding is the line. Exhibit 2, which I'm not going to go through, but it's there for you to reference later, is a listing of all of the non-traditional debt issuances that are the department has currently outstanding. There are 13 and 2 planned issuances, and one of those actually occurred yesterday, and the department, I understand, will be providing an update on how that went. The first issue is the Garvey debt issue that was raised in the overview, so I will not go into that. First recommendation is a requirement by statute that the General Assembly establish a maximum debt outstanding for the consolidated transportation bonds within the $4.5 million statutory cap. So that's number 1 recommendation. Second recommendation is annual language requiring MDOT to report on its non-traditional debt. We rely on that to basically do the parts of this analysis on the non-traditional debt. And the third one recommendation is to set the annual limits for the non-traditional debt. And that concludes my presentation, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Steve. For the PFC-backed bonds, how's that working right now, given that I assume PFC revenue is way down?
In terms of the new issuances or the current issuances?
The current issuances, how are they servicing those? I assume they're supposed to use the PFCs that they charge to service.
Yes, and the department can speak probably more explicitly to that. But in terms of all of these issuances, they're generally similar to the CTB debt. They have minimum coverage ratios that are supposed to protect in the bondholders in cases like this where, I have not heard anything that any of those issuances are in danger of missing any debt service payments. And I'm certain that before that would happen, the department would step in and at least advise the committees as to what they plan to do on that. But I believe at this point, despite decrease in revenues, that there are no imminent problems with the outstanding debt.
Great, thank you. Other questions for the analyst? Okay, thank you, Steve. Deputy Secretary Powell.
Thank you again. And again, for the record, I'm Sean Powell, Deputy Secretary of the Maryland Department of Transportation. Before I turn to the analysis, I'd like to provide you with an update on the airport revenue refunding bond sale that Mr. McCullough just mentioned. The issuance of revenue bonds by MDOT was authorized by the General Assembly in 2014. Yesterday, the department held its first bond sale under the new airport revenue bond structure. The issuance was for $220 million in refunding bonds to pay off outstanding parking revenue bonds issued by the MDTA and lease revenue bonds issued by Medco. This refunding allowed MDOT to streamline the Maryland Aviation Administration's debt profile. The bonds will be repaid from airport revenues, excluding passenger facility charges and customer facility charges, and have a 10-year annuity. The bonds are rated A1 by Moody's and an A by Fitch. The refunding achieved net present value savings of $13.7 million or 6.4%. The TIC, or true interest cost, was 1.27%. The bonds were oversubscribed by an average of 5 times during the initial order period, and orders were received from a diverse set of investors, which shows a very strong demand for this credit. We expect to return to the bond market in July for new money bonds to fund construction of the AB connector and baggage handling system replacement project of BWI Marshall Airport. Turning to the DLS analysts, I would again like to thank Mr. McCullough for all his work on our budgets. We were not asked to specifically respond to any issues in the analysis. The analysis included 3 recommended actions. All are pieces of annual budget bill language, and we concur with all 3. With that, we are happy to take any questions from the committee.
Questions for the department? Okay, if you just want to address that issue I raised about using the PFCs to service the existing debt and how that's working. I mean, what are you using to service the debt if there's a 75% drop in traffic?
Absolutely, and I'll let my much smarter Chief Financial Officer, Jacqueline Hartman, narrow right in on that. So Jacqueline.
Sure. Good afternoon. Jacqueline Hartman, Chief Financial Officer for the Maryland Department of Transportation. So we have been able to maintain all of our minimum coverage requirements for our PFC debt. We have looked at some minor delays of some projects just to ensure that we have enough money left in that fund should revenues continue to be substantially down for a prolonged period of time. So at this time, we are having sufficient revenues coming in. We also have a debt service reserve fund. Should revenues fall too low, we do have a reserve fund we can dip into to make those debt service payments.
Thank you, Jacqueline. Other questions for the department?
Great.
Great. Well, thank you again, Deputy Secretary Powell.
Thank you.
Colleagues will now turn to the Department of Agriculture and our analyst, Andrew Gray.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Hopefully you're seeing the operating budget summary on your screen there. This is from the Maryland Department of Agriculture. You see a $9.1 million decrease in the funding. This is basically related to the federal Maryland Farmer COVID-19 Relief Program funding. For cost containment actions, the Board of Public Works actions around $1.5 million from Maryland Department of Agriculture in the May and actually in the July 1, 2020 actions. And you see the actions that are noted here. In terms of the agency spending, Office of Resource Conservation is $25.5 million in cover crop payments. And then there's the Office of Marketing, Animal Industries and Consumer Services has Marbidco and Rural Legacy Program funding. Proposed budget reflected here, you see a little bit of change in personnel expenses. $602,000 in regular earnings reflects the fact that the annual salary review from fiscal 21 has not been budgeted yet from the Department of Budget and Management. And looking down in terms of the other major changes, there's the $10 million from Maryland Farmer COVID-19 Relief Program. That was one-time funding for fiscal 21. We'll talk about that in a second. And then I'll just also highlight here for the Marbidco net increase of $129,000. That reflects the return of money after the cost containment actions in fiscal 21, but then a reduction of $140,000 based on actions taken last year to provide for the Certified Local Farm Enterprise Program, which I believe there might be a bit of testimony about that. The bills that were vetoed by the governor creating that program have been overridden. I understand there needs to be some kind of understanding between the two houses to kind of completely satisfy those requirements to then override that. And then the $140,000 in fiscal 21 would then be authorized for that particular program should the agency implement that. Personnel data, 0.4% or 0.4 regular position decrease between the 2 years. The COVID-19 funding and impacts, a little bit of discussion here about the Maryland Farmer COVID-19 Relief Program, $10 million. However, it looks like the agency might be only paying around $4.9 million of that overall funding. And it's reflected for the 2 groups noted here. In terms of the impacts of COVID-19 on the agency or food supply interruptions, there's a change in how the watershed implementation plan assistance is provided by soil conservation districts. They do cover crop programs completely online for the first time, which is excellent work and using technology. Inspections were delayed, the licensing and permitting was postponed, and there were some challenges in terms of filling soil conservation district personnel as well. Spay neuter fund, just briefly here, so cat and dog fee on commercial feed that ends this soon, so there's legislation to extend it. fascinating trend here in terms of the euthanasia. So the program appears to be working. Sort of a softening trend, though. If you look at this graph, it looks like there's actually potentially an increase between the last quarter of 2018 or quarter one of 18 and quarter one of 19. So perhaps we're seeing diminishing returns. Recommendations to concur with the governor's allowance, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew, for that record time analysis. Any questions for the analyst? So, Vice Chair Crum.
So Andrew, is there any money coming from the CARES Act or other sources of federal funds that would go to the agriculture budget?
Well, there's the money that's coming in for the Maryland Farmer COVID-19 relief program discussed on page 9 of the analysis. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair Crum. Any other questions for the analyst? Okay, we'll now bring up the department, Secretary Bartenfelder. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Chairman of the committee. It's great to be here with all of you. To be right to the point, we concur with the analysis. I have here with me today Cassie Shirk, our legislative person, Eric Von Paris and John Nickerson from our financial end, Kevin Conroy, our Assistant Secretary, Hans Schmidt, Assistant Secretary in Resource Conservation, Steve Connolly, Assistant Secretary for Animal Health and Marketing, Rich Colburn, Special Assistant, Julie Oldberg, Deputy Secretary. So if there's any specific questions that the committee would have for any of those areas, we'd be glad to address them. One of the issues that you all may have been following, and I'll just bring you up quickly on what's happening with that, is the grain elevator, which Purdue owns in the Lothian area, which services Southern Maryland, the 5 counties in Southern Maryland, Prince George's, Culver, Charles, and Anne Arundel County. They were going to be pulling out of that, closing that grain facility, which would have been a devastating effect for farmers in the ag community in Southern Maryland. That facility is now going to remain open for 2 years or until they find a purchaser who will keep it open as a grain facility. So that's good news for Southern Maryland farmers, and that they'll be able to use that resource. With that, I'll turn to the committee to see if there's any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Any questions for the department? Vice Chair Crum, going the old-fashioned way.
I just can't get over to that raise hand function quick enough. So, Mr. Secretary, when you get that federal money, what are you going to do with it? I can't say it with more finesse. We just don't have time.
Well, Delegate Krim, we've already had a farmer relief program, which Assistant Secretary Steve Connolly administered, and he's with us on the call today. And I'd like to turn to him for him to fill you in on how that's helped many of our farmers.
Okay.
Yeah, Delegate Krim, most of the aid that's supplied to Maryland farmers comes directly through USDA's local Farm Service Agency offices. There's 20 Farm Service Agency offices in the state of Maryland. That's where farmers generally go to sign up for any type of disaster aid. And under the Coronavirus Food Assistance Program number 1 and number 2, they received a little over $70 million through that source. We were able to work with DBM to identify some CARES Act funds to make some additional payments to farmers in Maryland. And the first group of farmers were our contract poultry growers who were not able to participate in the federal program because they did not have ownership of the actual birds. The birds belong to the companies, not to the growers. And we ran that program, and we had made payments to poultry growers of almost $2 million for 545 growers in Maryland. We had a really high percentage of our poultry growers participate. And we also ran a program where we paid a bonus payment to the farmers that participated in the CFAP 1 program. The people that got the greatest amount of relief were our dairy and livestock producers who actually had animals at the beginning of the pandemic that suffered the greatest decrease in price and loss of markets, as well as grain farmers that had grain that was stored. They also had major price decreases because of the pandemic. So they benefited the most from the bonus program. We paid 15% of whatever they received under the Coronavirus Food Assistance Program #1. The federal program also did a food box program, and the Commodity Credit Corporation made purchases of farm products, which also helped price support our dairy industry quite a bit. So, sorry, got a little windy there.
So one more question for the secretary. So I'm not sure exactly the accounting here, how much money you might have left over, but are you going to try to restore some funding to the programs that were cut in your budget if you have some money that is left over from that new money that's coming from the feds?
So far, we've been able to administer our programs with the funding that we've had. So hopefully any relief money that comes through is going to go to benefit Maryland farmers directly.
Okay, I was just thinking about the Rural Maryland Fund, and I know that they lost some funding along the way. So I was hoping we could get them some money back.
Senator Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to follow up on Delegate Krim's point. We're in receipt of a letter from SMATIC, and their budget's been cut 25% last year, 25% this year. So I guess my more focused question would be, if we supported will you support a supplemental coming down from the governor to restore that?
Well, we wouldn't oppose it.
Okay, so you'll lobby for it then. I mean, Secretary Brinkley, I think if you heard from you, from some of us, I think it's important to restore that fund. So I know I'm preempting Charlotte and company, but that's a really important fund for us. So, and I know you know that too. So I think if we could, as was stated, there's going to be a lot of stimulus money coming down in terms of COVID. So I think this would be a great way to make them whole. They're just asking to be level funded. So thank you.
They celebrated their 25th anniversary today.
Yeah.
Delegate Beitzel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me? Okay, good. I have Mr. Secretary, how you doing?
Good, good.
Hey, I have a question for you. With the push for more solar panels and renewable energy sources and windmills and that sort of thing, if you go back to when they first started installing windmills and farmers are entering into leases and stuff to have windmills built or to allow them to be placed on their farms, they had leases, and a lot of these farmers, because of the financial condition and stuff they were in, they just seen the dollar signs and not the far out consequences of what's going to happen to these things if they're abandoned and that sort of thing. Has the department looked at anything of like putting guidance out to farmers on things that should be in leases and this sort of thing if they agree to have these facilities, especially solar panels that are taking more and more acreage of farms away? And I know we're getting several projects out in Garrett County now that probably are covered about a foot of snow now, but I wonder if the department has given this thought, and if you haven't, could you look into seeing if you could give guidance to these farmers that are contemplating or allowing leases to put these facilities on their property?
Yeah, we haven't put out anything specifically, but when we get questions or inquiries, we guide them to the University of Maryland School of Ag Law.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Beitzel. Any other questions for the department? Okay, we do have additional testimony from Stephen McHenry from Morbidco. And Charlotte, I'm not sure if you signed up or not. I don't have you on my list, but
I'm just here to answer questions. Thank you. Thank you for your support.
Thank you. Mr. McHenry?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Steve McHenry, representing Mara Bidco. For the record, I know time is very short. Let me just say that last year surprised all of us. It was a year we were not expecting. That was certainly true at Mara Bidco. We spent a lot of time doing things last year we would not have expected in helping our farm and forestry and seafood businesses adjust to the pandemic. 14% of our borrowers requested loan forbearance assistance. And so we're moving forward. Mr. Gray mentioned the Certified Local Farm Enterprise Program. We are moving forward now with the aggregation program. We'll be launching or announcing that next week. And we're certainly prepared to move forward this spring with legislation you're considering this afternoon to help some of our more affected industries recover, and then also make some adjustments, including help for urban farmers and folks at farmers markets. So that concludes my comments. Mr. Chairman, you have our annual report.
Thank you so much. Any questions for Mr. McHenry? Okay, Chair McCray.
Just on behalf of myself, Senator Edwards, Senator Saling, and Senator Peters, I just want to acknowledge the secretaries that came through with in the service, Marylanders, and all of the analysts, whether it's Andrew Gray, Tanya Zimmerman, Caleb White, Steve McCullough. We're thankful for all of you all's leadership. Thank you again. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator, it's always great to work with Overly graduates.
Obviously, I echo everything but that last part. And we just also add that obviously we had to go through some of these analyses very quickly. So if you have questions, at least on the House side, follow up with Ken Weaver and he will make sure we get any questions answered from the agencies and departments or the analysts. And I will see some of you either on the floor or on the screen. Thank you all very much.